Margaret Whitmore had more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. Her house sat on top of a hill overlooking the entire city, with windows so big you could see your reflection from across the room. Everything inside sparkled. The floors were made of marble that felt cold even through shoes. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings so high that changing a light bulb required calling someone with a very tall ladder. In the front hallway, right where everyone could see it when they walked in, sat a piano. Not just any piano, but a Steinway grand piano worth more than most people's houses. It was black and shiny, polished every week by the cleaning staff. The problem was nobody ever played it. Margaret had bought it 5 years ago because her decorator said every proper mansion needed a piano in the entrance. It looked elegant. It made the right impression. That was all that mattered. Margaret spent her days doing what wealthy people do when they don't actually have to work. She went to lunch with other wealthy women. She attended charity galas where everyone wore dresses that cost thousands of dollars to raise money for people who needed help paying rent. She scrolled through her phone, planned parties, and complained about problems that weren't really problems at all. Rosa Martinez had worked for Margaret for almost 8 years. Every morning at 7, she arrived at the mansion's back entrance, changed into her uniform, and began cleaning rooms that were already clean. She dusted furniture that nobody used. She organized closets full of clothes that still had price tags attached. She nodded politely when Margaret barely acknowledged her presence, treating her like she was part of the furniture. Rosa never complained. She couldn't afford to. Her husband had died in a construction accident 2 years earlier, leaving her alone to raise their son. The insurance money had run out quickly. Hospital bills had a way of doing that. This job with Margaret paid enough to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Barely, but enough. So Rosa smiled, said yes ma'am, and did whatever was asked of her. One Tuesday afternoon, Rosa was polishing the silver in the dining room when Margaret breezed in, holding a wine glass even though it was only 3 in the afternoon. She was on the phone, laughing too loudly at something someone had said. When she hung up, she finally seemed to notice Rosa standing there. "Oh, Rosa," Margaret said, as if she'd just remembered her maid had a name. "I'm having a garden party this Saturday. About 40 people. Make sure everything looks perfect." "Yes, ma'am," Rosa replied automatically. Margaret started to walk away, then paused. "You have a son, don't you?" Rosa looked up, surprised. In 8 years, Margaret had never asked about her family. "Yes, ma'am, Miguel, he's 12. Margaret took a sip of wine, barely interested. "What does he do? Sports or something?" Rosa felt a small flutter of pride in her chest. "He plays piano, actually. He taught himself by watching videos online." "He's really quite piano?" Margaret's eyebrows lifted slightly. "How amusing. Does he know anything decent? Any real pieces?" "Yes, he practices every day." "He can play?" "Perfect." Margaret cut her off with a wave of her hand. "Bring him to the party on Saturday. He can play for my guests. They'll find it charming. You know, entertainment with a personal touch. Very trendy right now." Rosa's pride deflated like a punctured balloon. Margaret wasn't interested in Miguel's talent. She wanted him as a novelty, a conversation piece for her wealthy friends. "Look at my maid's son playing piano. How quaint. How generous of me to give him this opportunity." But what could Rosa say? "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, that's very kind. He should wear something nice. Nothing too flashy, but presentable." Margaret was already checking her phone again, the conversation over. "Have him ready by 2 o'clock. He can play for about 20 minutes, then help you with serving drinks or whatever." Rosa wanted to say that Miguel wasn't a servant, that he was a child with dreams and feelings, but the words stuck in her throat. She thought about their rent, due in 2 weeks. She thought about Miguel's shoes with holes in the soles that she'd been trying to replace. She thought about the electric bill sitting on their kitchen counter. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. That evening, Rosa told Miguel about the party. They sat in their small apartment at a kitchen table that wobbled unless you folded a piece of cardboard under one leg. Miguel's eyes lit up when he heard he'd be playing on a real grand piano. "A Steinway," he said, his voice filled with awe. "Mom, do you know how incredible those sound? I've only ever played on that old keyboard we got from the thrift store." Rosa forced a smile, not wanting to dim his excitement. "Yes, honey. It's a beautiful piano. What should I play? Maybe some Chopin? Or I've been working on that Rachmaninoff piece. It's really hard, but I think I can do it." "Whatever you think is best. Mi amor. Miguel spent the next 3 days practicing on his electric keyboard, the one with keys that stuck and didn't feel anything like a real piano. He borrowed books from the library, studying the pieces until his eyes hurt. He watched videos over and over. His phone screen cracked from when he'd dropped it last year, but still working enough to learn from. Saturday arrived too quickly. Rosa pressed Miguel's only dress shirt, the white one he wore to church. It was a little too small now, the sleeves ending just above his wrists, but it would have to do. She combed his dark hair carefully, making sure every strand lay flat. He clutched his sheet music, pages printed at the library for 10 cents each, marked up with his own notes in pencil. They arrived at the mansion through the back entrance, the way Rosa always entered. Miguel stared at everything with wide eyes. He'd never been inside before. His mother had always made him wait outside on her rare visits to work when school was closed. "It's so big," he whispered. "Remember your manners," Rosa reminded him gently. "Be polite. Say yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am." "I know, Mom." The garden was already filling with guests when they went outside. Women in dresses that probably cost more than Rosa made in 6 months. Men in casual clothes that somehow still screamed expensive. Everyone held glasses of champagne, laughing and talking in that particular way wealthy people do, where every word sounds important even when they're saying nothing at all. Margaret spotted them and walked over, her heels clicking on the stone patio. She looked at Miguel the way you might look at a new appliance you'd ordered, checking to make sure it met basic standards. "You must be the piano boy," she said. "Not Miguel. Not her maid son. The piano boy, yes, ma'am. Thank you for letting me play." Well, don't expect too much attention. Most people are here to socialize." She gestured vaguely toward the piano visible through the open French doors. "You can start in 10 minutes. Play something pretty but not too loud. Background music, you understand?" Miguel nodded, but Rosa saw the slight slump in his shoulders. He'd prepared for a performance, not background music. She squeezed his hand, wishing she could protect him from this, from being treated as less than he was. Margaret walked away without another word, already greeting a new arrival with air kisses and exaggerated enthusiasm. Rosa watched her son walk toward that beautiful piano, his sheet music trembling slightly in his hands, and prayed that somehow this wouldn't break his spirit. She had no idea that in 10 minutes, everything was about to change. Miguel walked through those French doors feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. The piano sat there waiting, more beautiful than anything he'd ever seen. The wood gleamed under the chandelier light. When he lifted the cover from the keys, they were perfect. Ivory white and ebony black, not a scratch or stain anywhere. Nothing like his cheap keyboard at home with its sticky keys and missing stand. He sat down on the bench, and it was exactly the right height. At home, he used 2 phone books stacked on a folding chair. His feet actually touched the pedals properly. For just a moment, he forgot about the wealthy people outside. He forgot that Mrs. Whitmore had called him the piano boy. He forgot that his shirt was too small and his shoes were scuffed. There was just him and this incredible instrument. Outside, the party continued without paying any attention to the skinny kid at the piano. Margaret was telling some story about her recent trip to Paris, waving her hands dramatically. Someone laughed too loudly at something that probably wasn't that funny. Ice clinked in expensive glasses. A woman in a red dress was showing off her new bracelet, diamonds catching the sunlight. Then Miguel started to play. His fingers touched the keys, and the first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 floated out into the garden, soft at first like a question being asked, then building, growing, becoming something that demanded to be heard. The first person to stop talking was an older man standing near the fountain. He turned his head toward the music, his glass frozen halfway to his mouth. Then a woman in pearls went quiet, her eyes widening. One by one, conversations died out like candles being extinguished. Within 30 seconds, the entire garden had gone silent except for that piano. Miguel wasn't just playing notes on a page. He was telling a story without words. His small hands moved across the keys with a speed and precision that seemed impossible for someone his age. The music swelled and dipped, whispered and roared. Every phrase had emotion in it. Not the kind you fake or force, but the real kind that comes from somewhere deep inside. He played like someone who understood loss. Like someone who'd watched his mother cry when she thought he was asleep. Like someone who knew what it meant to want something so badly it hurt. The music carried all of that, every hope and dream and quiet disappointment, and suddenly everyone in that garden could feel it too. Rosa stood near the kitchen door, her hands clasped over her heart. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She'd heard Miguel practice 1,000 times on that old keyboard, but this was different. This was her son finally being heard the way he deserved to be heard. A man Rosa didn't recognize had moved closer to the French doors. He was Asian, maybe in his 50s, wearing a simple black suit. Unlike the other guests, he wasn't holding a drink. He wasn't checking his phone. He was completely focused on Miguel, his expression intense and unreadable. Margaret had stopped mid-sentence in her Paris story. She stood there with her mouth slightly open, champagne glass dangling from her fingers. This wasn't background music. This was something else entirely, and she hadn't been prepared for it. The music built to its peak, Miguel's whole body moving with the effort. His eyes were closed now. He wasn't thinking about technique or finger placement anymore. He was just feeling, just letting the music pour out of him like water from a broken dam. The final notes rang out, hanging in the air like they didn't want to leave. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was so complete you could hear birds chirping in the trees beyond the garden wall. Then the applause started. Not polite party clapping, but real applause. The kind that makes your hands hurt. People were standing up from their chairs. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" A woman wiped tears from her eyes, not caring that her makeup was running. Miguel opened his eyes, looking confused and overwhelmed. His hands were shaking. He'd never played for anyone except his mother and his music teacher at school, who only came once a week and taught 40 other students. He hadn't expected this. He started to stand up, not sure what to do next. The man in the black suit was already moving toward him, walking quickly across the garden. But Margaret was faster. She intercepted him smoothly, stepping directly into his path with a bright smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, everyone," Margaret announced loudly, reclaiming control of her party. "Wasn't that lovely?" Such a treat to hear from Rosa's son. She said it like she'd personally discovered him, like she deserved credit for his talent. The man in the black suit tried to move around her. "Excuse me, I need to speak with Mr. Chen. Wonderful to see you," Margaret said, her voice sugary sweet but with steel underneath. "I didn't realize you were coming today. I thought you were in Boston. I flew back early." "Mrs. Whitmore, that child." Yes, quite good for someone self-taught," Margaret interrupted, still smiling. "Now I believe they're about to bring out the desserts. You simply must try the lemon tart. My chef trained in Lyon." She had positioned herself so that other guests were now crowding around, congratulating her on the entertainment, asking questions about the caterer and the flowers. Mr. Chen found himself pushed to the side by the crowd, his moment lost. Miguel had made it to the piano room doorway when Margaret spotted him. She walked over quickly, reaching into her purse. Other guests were still talking loudly, the moment already fading as they returned to their own conversations and concerns. "That was adequate," Margaret said to Miguel, her voice cool and dismissive. She pressed a $20 bill into his hand, folding his fingers around it like she was tipping a valet who'd parked her car. "Very nice. Now your mother probably needs help in the kitchen. Run along." Miguel looked down at the $20. At home, this was a lot of money. This could buy groceries for 3 days. But somehow, holding it in his hand after what he'd just done, it felt like an insult. Like everything he'd poured into that music had been reduced to the price of a pizza. "Yes, ma'am," he whispered, because that's what his mother had taught him to say. "Oh. And Miguel?" Margaret added, already turning away. "Best not to get too comfortable with that piano. It's quite valuable, and I'd hate for something to happen to it." She walked away before he could respond, immediately greeting someone else with air kisses and fake enthusiasm. Miguel stood there for a moment, the $20 bill crumpled in his fist, feeling confused and small and somehow wrong, even though he'd done everything right. He didn't see Mr. Chen watching him from across the garden, memorizing his face. He didn't hear the music critic asking other guests who that remarkable child was, where he studied, who his teacher was. He didn't know that several people were already pulling out their phones trying to record something, anything, disappointed that they'd missed capturing what they'd just witnessed. Miguel just walked toward the kitchen where his mother was waiting, his too small shirt sticking to his back with sweat, his heart still pounding from the performance. He handed Rosa the $20 without saying anything. She took it because they needed it, but they both understood what it meant. They'd given Margaret something priceless, and she'd handed them pocket change in return. Mr. Chen managed to extract himself from a conversation about summer homes in the Hamptons. He found Margaret by the dessert table, her plate loaded with tiny pastries she probably wouldn't eat. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said firmly, "we need to talk about that boy." Margaret's smile tightened just slightly. "Oh? I'm Jonathan Chen. I'm a music critic for the Symphony Hall and I scout for the National Youth Orchestra." He spoke quickly, urgently. "That child has the kind of talent I see maybe once every 5 years. Maybe. He needs proper training immediately. The right teacher, the right opportunities. I can arrange an audition for—" "How lovely," Margaret interrupted smoothly. "I'll be sure to mention it to Rosa. This isn't a casual suggestion, Mrs. Whitmore. This is urgent. That boy could have a real career if—" "Mr. Chen." Margaret's voice was pleasant but firm. "Rosa is my employee. A very good one. I'd hate for her to get distracted by unrealistic dreams and decide she needs to leave to pursue them. Good domestic help is incredibly difficult to find these days." The threat hung in the air between them, unspoken but crystal clear. Jonathan stared at her, understanding dawning on his face. She wasn't going to help Miguel. She was going to bury his talent to keep his mother working for minimum wage. Jonathan Chen had seen a lot of things in his 30 years as a music critic, but he'd never seen someone intentionally sabotage a child's future right in front of him. He stood there in Margaret's perfectly manicured garden, holding a tiny fork with an untouched piece of cake on it, trying to process what she'd just said. "You can't be serious," he finally managed to say. Margaret's smile never wavered. "I'm always serious about keeping good employees, Mr. Chen. Rosa understands her priorities. Family comes first, of course, stability, a steady paycheck, medical insurance." She paused, letting that last part sink in. "Children need security, don't you think?" "Not pipe dreams. That wasn't a pipe dream I just heard. That was background music for a garden party," Margaret finished. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on the catering staff." She glided away, leaving Jonathan standing there feeling sick to his stomach. He pulled a business card from his wallet and looked around for Rosa or Miguel, but they'd both disappeared into the house. He couldn't just walk into the kitchen area. That would be awkward. Maybe even get Rosa in trouble. Instead, he approached one of the servers, a young guy in his 20s. "Excuse me, could you possibly give this to Rosa, the woman who works here? It's important." The server looked at the card, then at Jonathan and shrugged. "Sure, I guess." Jonathan watched him walk toward the kitchen, hoping the card would actually make it to Rosa. But as he turned back toward the party, he saw Margaret intercept the server, say something to him with that same pleasant smile. The server nodded, handed her the card, and Margaret glanced at it briefly before slipping it into her pocket. Jonathan's heart sank. He should have known. He tried to think of another way, but short of tracking down Rosa's home address, which felt invasive and creepy, he was stuck. He stayed at the party another 20 minutes, hoping to catch Rosa leaving, but Margaret seemed to sense what he was doing. She kept steering conversations his way, asking his opinion on upcoming performances, effectively keeping him occupied. Finally, Jonathan left, getting into his car with a heavy feeling in his chest. He'd discovered an incredible talent, and there was nothing he could do about it. At least not right now. Inside the mansion, Margaret found that business card in her pocket while walking through the hallway. She looked at it for a moment. Jonathan Chen, music critic, Symphony Hall. There were phone numbers, an email address, even a personal cell number written on the back in pen. Without hesitation, she dropped it into a decorative trash can in her study. Then she went back to her party, laughing at someone's joke about golf courses in Scotland, the card already forgotten. The weeks that followed were strange for Miguel. Kids at school had heard about him playing at some rich lady's party. A few asked about it, but when he tried to explain, the words came out wrong. It sounded like bragging. So he stopped talking about it, letting the moment fade away like it had never happened. He went back to practicing on his old keyboard in their small apartment. The keys felt even more wrong now that he'd played on a real piano. The sound was tinny and fake, but he practiced anyway, every day after school, because music was the only thing that made sense to him. Rosa worked her usual shifts at Margaret's mansion. Nothing changed. Margaret never mentioned the party or Miguel's performance. It was like it had never happened. Rosa cleaned the same rooms, organized the same closets, and every time she passed that beautiful piano in the hallway, something inside her hurt a little. She thought about Jonathan Chen sometimes, wondered what he'd wanted to say, wondered if it could have been something important. But she didn't know his last name, didn't know how to find him, and honestly, what would be the point? They needed this job. Dreams were expensive, and they could barely afford reality. One afternoon, about a month after the party, Margaret called Rosa into her private study. This almost never happened. Rosa felt her stomach tighten with worry. Was she being fired? Had she done something wrong? "Sit down, Rosa," Margaret said, gesturing to a chair. Rosa sat on the edge of the seat, her hands folded in her lap. "Yes, ma'am." "I've been thinking," Margaret began, leaning back in her expensive leather chair. "Your son, Miguel, he showed some aptitude at the party." Rosa's heart jumped. "Yes, ma'am. He loves music very much. I've decided to be generous." Margaret paused like she expected Rosa to thank her already. "He can come here after school twice a week. Practice on the piano for an hour. It's just sitting there unused anyway." For a moment, Rosa couldn't breathe. 2 hours a week on a real piano? For Miguel, this would be like Christmas and his birthday combined. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's—" "Thank you. Thank you so much. There are conditions, of course." Margaret's voice turned businesslike. "He comes in through the back entrance. He practices only when I'm not home or when I say it's okay. He touches nothing else in the house. And Rosa, this stays between us. I don't want other employees thinking I'm running some kind of charity." "Of course, ma'am. I understand. And one more thing." Margaret leaned forward slightly. "If anyone asks about Miguel, any music teachers or scouts or whatever, you tell them he's not interested. He's happy with his arrangement here. Understood?" Something cold settled in Rosa's stomach. "I don't understand, ma'am." "Why would—" "Because I'm giving him access to a piano worth more than you make in 2 years," Margaret said sharply. "Because I'm being generous with my time and my property. And because I need to know that you're loyal to this household. That you're not going to run off chasing fantasies the moment someone dangles an opportunity in front of you." There it was. The real reason. Margaret was buying their loyalty with 2 hours of piano practice a week, making sure they stayed dependent on her, grateful to her, trapped by her kindness. Rosa should have said no. Should have stood up and walked out. But she thought about Miguel's face when she told him about the Steinway. Thought about how his eyes would light up. Thought about their rent, their bills, the fact that her car was making a weird noise she couldn't afford to get checked. "Yes, ma'am," she heard herself say. "I understand. Good, he can start tomorrow." When Rosa told Miguel that evening, she left out the conditions. Just told him about the piano, the practice time. His reaction was exactly what she'd expected. He actually jumped up from the dinner table, his face splitting into the biggest smile she'd seen in months. "Really? The Steinway? Mom, are you serious?" "Yes, baby. Twice a week. Every Tuesday and Thursday after school." Miguel hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't believe it. I can work on the hard pieces now. The ones I can't really practice on the keyboard because the touch is so different and—" He kept talking, the words tumbling out. And Rosa smiled and nodded and tried to ignore the sick feeling in her stomach. She'd just agreed to let Margaret Whitmore control their lives even more than she already did. She'd traded her son's future for 2 hours a week in a rich woman's hallway. But what choice did she have? The next afternoon, Miguel walked through that back entrance like he was entering a cathedral. Rosa had given him strict instructions. Be quiet, be respectful, touch nothing except the piano. He promised he would. The piano sat there waiting for him exactly as he remembered. He sat down carefully, almost afraid it wasn't real. Then he started to play, and for 1 hour nothing else mattered. Not their small apartment or his mother's tired eyes or the fact that his shoes still had holes in them. Just the music and that incredible instrument and the feeling that this was what he was meant to do. Margaret stood at the top of the stairs where she could hear but not be seen. She listened to Miguel play, his talent undeniable even to her untrained ear. A small voice in her head whispered that she should help him more, that he deserved real training, real opportunities. She ignored that voice. This was enough. More than enough. She was being kind, wasn't she? Generous? Most employers wouldn't do this much. She walked away, back to her room, and turned on the television to drown out the sound of the piano. It was easier that way. Easier not to think about what she was doing, or more accurately, what she wasn't doing. Downstairs, Miguel played on, unaware that he was practicing in a beautiful cage. Unaware that the very thing he loved most was being used to keep him and his mother trapped. Unaware that somewhere in the city, Jonathan Chen still had Miguel's face memorized, still woke up some nights thinking about that performance, still wished he'd done more. The music filled the empty hallway, beautiful and heartbreaking. Talent blooming in the dark where no one important would ever hear it. At least. That's what Margaret thought. She had no idea that everything was about to fall apart. 3 months passed. Miguel came every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, slipping through the back entrance with his backpack and sheet music. He'd spend exactly 1 hour at that piano, then leave the same way he came. Sometimes he saw Margaret watching from the stairs. She never said anything to him, just observed like he was a pet performing tricks. Rosa tried to tell herself this was enough, that she should be grateful. But every time she passed that piano and saw her son playing, something inside her twisted. He was getting better. You could hear it in every note. His technique was improving, his understanding of the music deepening. But he needed more than 2 hours a week. He needed a real teacher. He needed other musicians to learn from. He needed the kind of education that opened doors instead of keeping them closed. She didn't say anything, though. What could she say? Everything changed on a rainy Tuesday in November. Miguel had woken up that morning feeling off. His head hurt and his throat was scratchy. Rosa had taken his temperature and it was 99.2. Not terrible, but not great either. "Maybe you should stay home today," she'd said, pressing her hand against his forehead. "Mom, I'm fine, and it's piano day. I can't miss it." "Miguel, please, Mom. I've been working on this new piece for 2 weeks. I'm so close to getting it right." Rosa had hesitated, then agreed. It was just a small fever. Kids got them all the time. She'd pick him up right after work and they'd go straight home. But by noon, Miguel's teacher had called. His fever had spiked to 102. He was in the nurse's office asking for his mom. Rosa's heart had dropped straight through the floor. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," Rosa said, finding Margaret in the sitting room. "My son is sick at school. I need to go get him." Margaret looked up from her phone, annoyed. "Can't someone else pick him up?" "I'm having guests for dinner tonight. The house needs to be perfect. There is no one else, ma'am. I'm all he has." "This is very inconvenient, Rosa." Rosa bit back the words she wanted to say. "I know, ma'am. I'm sorry. I'll work extra hours tomorrow to make up for it." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Fine. Go. But be back first thing in the morning. And Rosa, this better not become a habit." Rosa grabbed her purse and rushed out, her hands shaking as she drove to the school. When she got there, Miguel was lying on the cot in the nurse's office, his face flushed and his eyes glassy with fever. "Hey, baby," she said softly, brushing his hair back. "Let's get you home." "Mom, I'm sorry. I know you had to leave work. Don't you dare apologize. Come on." Miguel stood up but immediately swayed. Rosa caught him, alarmed. "Okay, slow down. Take your time." But as they walked to the car, Miguel got worse. He was mumbling things that didn't make sense. The fever was higher now, she could tell. By the time they reached the parking lot, he was leaning heavily against her, barely able to walk. Rosa's car chose that exact moment to not start. She turned the key once, twice, 3 times. Nothing but a clicking sound. The weird noise it had been making finally meant something bad. She wanted to scream. Instead, she called an Uber, her hands shaking as she typed in Margaret's address. It was closer than their apartment and she couldn't wait for a bus. Not with Miguel like this. When they arrived at the mansion, Rosa helped Miguel through the back door. He was burning up now, his skin radiating heat. She needed to get him water. Maybe a cold compress. Maybe call a doctor. Though her insurance wouldn't kick in until next month and she didn't have the money for an emergency visit. "Just sit here, baby," she said, settling him on a chair in the back hallway. "Let me get you some water." But Miguel didn't stay sitting. The fever had him confused, delirious. He stood up on shaky legs and wandered through the house like he was sleepwalking. Some deep part of his brain knew where he was going, the only place that ever made sense to him. Rosa came back with the water to find the chair empty. "Miguel?" She felt panic rising in her chest. "Miguel, where are you?" She found him at the piano. He'd collapsed against it, his feverish forehead pressed against the keys, one hand still, reaching for them like the instrument could somehow make him feel better. A single discordant note hung in the air. "Miguel!" Rosa rushed to him, trying to lift him. He was conscious, but barely, mumbling something about Chopin and needing to practice. That's when Margaret appeared at the top of the stairs. She took in the scene below, her face twisting with anger. "What is going on here?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. He's sick. He has a high fever. He wandered off and he's gotten his germs all over my piano." Margaret came down the stairs fast, her heels clicking like gunshots. "Do you have any idea how much this instrument costs? What if he damages it? What if I catch something?" Rosa held her sick son closer. "Please, Mrs. Whitmore, he didn't mean to. He's delirious with fever." "I don't care what he is. This is completely unacceptable." Margaret stood there in her expensive clothes, looking at the sick child like he was something disgusting she'd stepped in. "I have a concert pianist friend coming tomorrow to play for a fundraiser. What if she catches something from your son? I'll clean everything. I'll disinfect it. I just need to get him—" "You need to get him out of my house," Margaret snapped. "And frankly, Rosa, I'm questioning whether this arrangement is working anymore. You bring your sick child to work. He touches my valuable property." Something in Rosa broke. Not like a twig snapping, but like a dam finally giving way after holding back too much pressure for too long. She looked at Margaret, really looked at her, and suddenly saw everything clearly. This woman had never cared about Miguel's talent, had never cared about giving him opportunities. She'd just wanted to feel generous while keeping Rosa trapped and grateful. She'd let a child with extraordinary gifts practice for 2 hours a week, like she was throwing scraps to a dog, then acted like she deserved praise for it. And now she was standing there more worried about a piano than a sick 12-year-old boy. "You know what?" Rosa's voice came out steady and calm, which surprised her. "We quit." Margaret blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. We quit. I quit. We're done." "Rosa, don't be ridiculous. You need this job." "I need a lot of things, Mrs. Whitmore. I need to afford a doctor for my son. I need to pay rent. I need groceries and electricity and gas for my car that just broke down." Rosa stood up carefully, lifting Miguel with her. He was heavy, but she was strong. Stronger than she'd realized. "But you know what I don't need? I don't need to work for someone who treats my child like he's less than human. Who treats both of us like we should be grateful for scraps when we've given you everything. I've been nothing but generous to you," Margaret said, her voice rising. "I let your son use my piano." "You trapped us with that piano," Rosa said quietly. "You knew Miguel was special. You knew he needed real training. And you kept him here, practicing in your hallway like a secret, because you were afraid I'd leave if he got real opportunities. You didn't let him use your piano out of kindness, Mrs. Whitmore. You did it to keep us under your control." Margaret's face flushed. "How dare you? After everything I've done for you, you've done nothing for us. We've done everything for you." Rosa adjusted Miguel in her arms. He was barely aware of what was happening, his head resting against her shoulder. "We've cleaned your house and organized your life and made you look good at parties. And my son, my beautiful, talented son, played his heart out for your guests, and you gave him $20 and told him he was adequate. I will not be spoken to this way in my own home. Then I'll leave. Right now. Today. You can clean your own house and organize your own closets and find someone else to make you feel like you're a good person when you're not." Rosa walked toward the back door, her legs shaking but her head held high. She had no idea what she was going to do. No plan, no backup, no safety net. Just her sick son in her arms and the sudden overwhelming knowledge that anything, even uncertainty, was better than this. "You'll never work in this town again," Margaret called after her. "I have friends everywhere. You think you can just walk out on me?" Rosa turned back at the door. "I'm not walking out on you, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm walking away from you. There's a difference." She carried Miguel out into the rain, letting the door close behind them. Her car still wouldn't start. She didn't have money for another Uber. Her son was burning with fever in her arms, and she had no idea how she was going to pay for a doctor or rent or anything else. But as she stood there in the rain, holding her, Child close, Rosa felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. She felt free. Rosa sat on the curb outside Margaret's mansion, rain soaking through her uniform, holding Miguel close to keep him warm. Her phone battery was at 3%. Her car was dead. She had $42 in her wallet and about $200 in the bank, which needed to cover rent in 12 days. She should have felt terrified. Part of her did. But there was something else too, something warm and solid beneath the fear. She'd stood up for herself, for her son. After 8 years of swallowing her pride and saying, "Yes, ma'am," she'd finally said no. Miguel stirred against her shoulder. "Mom, where are we?" "We're going home, baby. Just figuring out how." She pulled out her phone to call her neighbor, the one who sometimes gave her rides when her car acted up. Before she could dial, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down and Rosa tensed, prepared to grab Miguel and run if she needed to. But the face that looked out at her was familiar. The man from the garden party, the one who'd tried to talk to Margaret afterward. He looked older than she remembered, with gray at his temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Rosa," he said. "Rosa Martinez." She stared at him, confused. "Yes?" "I'm Jonathan Chen. I don't know if you remember me. I was at Mrs. Whitmore's party in August. I heard your son play." "I remember," Rosa said quietly. Jonathan looked at Miguel, taking in his flushed face and glassy eyes. "Is he okay? Do you need help?" Rosa's first instinct was to say no, that they were fine. 8 years of pride and independence didn't disappear in one afternoon, but Miguel was heavy in her arms, and the rain was getting harder, and her phone battery was dying. "Yes," she admitted, "we need help." Jonathan was out of the car in seconds. "Let me drive you. Hospital? Home?" "The free clinic on Madison Street, if they're still open. His fever is really high." "Get in. We'll call them on the way." The clinic was still open, barely. They got Miguel inside and a nurse took his temperature, 103.8. They gave him medicine to bring the fever down and tested him for flu and strep. "Strep throat," the doctor said. "Antibacterial medicine, rest, fluids." The visit would have cost $200, but the clinic worked on a sliding scale. Rosa paid $15 and felt grateful beyond words. While they waited for Miguel's prescription, Jonathan bought them coffee from a vending machine. It was terrible coffee, but it was hot and Rosa wrapped her hands around the cup like it was treasure. "I've been looking for you," Jonathan said quietly. "For months. I tried to give you my card at the party, but Margaret intercepted it." Rosa wasn't surprised. "She threw it away, didn't she?" "Probably. I should have tried harder. Should have found another way." He looked at Miguel, who was falling asleep in a chair with the medicine starting to work. "That boy has a gift. One of the most remarkable I've ever heard. And I've been doing this for 30 years. I know he's talented," Rosa said. Her voice cracked slightly. "But we can't afford lessons, can barely afford to keep him in school supplies. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. There's a youth orchestra program, a really prestigious one, full scholarship. Includes private lessons with a concert pianist, ensemble practice 3 times a week, performance opportunities." Jonathan pulled out a card, a different one this time. "I can get Miguel an audition. Actually, after what I heard, I can probably skip the audition and get him accepted. That's how good he is." Rosa took the card with shaking hands. "I don't understand. Why would you do this?" "Because that's my job. I find talented kids who might not otherwise get opportunities. And Miguel, your son, he's not just talented, he's exceptional. The kind of musician who comes along maybe once in a generation." Jonathan leaned forward. "The program covers everything, no cost to you. They even provide instruments if needed. Though for piano, that's more about practice time. They have agreements with local churches and community centers." "I just quit my job," Rosa said, the reality of it hitting her fresh. "I have no savings. I don't even know how I'm paying rent next month. What if we end up homeless? What if—" "One step at a time," Jonathan said gently. "Right now, let's focus on getting Miguel healthy and into this program. The rest we'll figure out." Rosa wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that walking away from Margaret wouldn't destroy them. But years of barely surviving had taught her that hope was expensive and disappointment was free. Still, she held onto that card like a lifeline. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Rosa's life. She filed for unemployment, which would give her something but not much. She applied to every cleaning service, every housekeeping position, every job she was qualified for. Margaret had been true to her word about spreading the word to her friends. 3 promising interviews went cold after they called her references, but she also got calls from places that didn't run in Margaret's circles. A small hotel near the airport hired her part-time. It wasn't enough money, but it was something. Her neighbor, Mrs. Kim, started paying her to clean her house twice a week. Rosa's pride wanted to refuse charity, but Mrs. Kim insisted it wasn't charity, that her arthritis made cleaning hard and she'd been meaning to hire someone anyway. Miguel got better quickly, the way kids do. And on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after they'd left Margaret's mansion, Rosa drove him to the youth orchestra audition in their newly fixed car. Mrs. Kim's son-in-law was a mechanic and fixed it for the cost of parts only. Miguel was nervous, more nervous than Rosa had ever seen him. His hands shook as he signed in, looking around at the other kids in the waiting room. Some of them had fancy clothes. Some arrived with parents who looked like they belonged at Margaret's garden parties. "What if I'm not good enough?" Miguel whispered to his mother. Rosa took his face in her hands. "You are enough. Exactly as you are. No matter what happens in that room, you are enough. Understand?" He nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. When Miguel's name was called, he walked into the audition room like he was walking to his own execution. Rosa waited outside, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles turned white. She prayed to every saint she could remember, promised God things she had no business promising. 15 minutes later, Miguel came out. His face was unreadable. Rosa stood up, her heart pounding. "So?" she asked. Miguel's face broke into the biggest smile she'd seen since before his father died. "They said yes. They said yes right there in the room. Mom, they want me to start next week." Rosa burst into tears right there in the hallway. She hugged her son so tight he had to remind her he needed to breathe. Other people stared, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, maybe ever, she felt like things might actually be okay. The program changed Miguel's life. He practiced 4 hours a day, had lessons with a pianist who'd performed at Carnegie Hall, played in ensembles with other serious young musicians. He grew not just as a pianist, but as a person, more confident, more focused, more himself. Rosa took a second job cleaning offices at night. It was exhausting, but every time she wanted to give up, she remembered walking out of Margaret's mansion in the rain. Remembered choosing dignity over security. That memory kept her going when nothing else would. 6 months later, Miguel had his first real performance. Not background music at someone's party, but an actual recital at the Symphony Hall. Youth orchestra members and their families filled half the auditorium. Rosa sat in the 3rd row, wearing a dress she'd found at a thrift store but felt like a queen in. When Miguel played, it was even more beautiful than that day at the garden party. He'd grown so much, learned so much. The music poured out of him like light, and Rosa cried through the entire performance. Happy tears this time. In the back of the auditorium, almost hidden in the shadows, sat Margaret Whitmore. She'd seen the announcement in the Symphony Hall newsletter, Youth Orchestra Showcase, and there was Miguel's name. She'd come out of curiosity, she told herself, just to see if the boy really was as good as people claimed. She'd heard rumors through her social circle about some prodigy in the youth orchestra, some kid from nothing who was making waves. She hadn't connected it to Miguel until she saw the program. Now she sat in the dark, watching him play, listening to the audience's thunderous applause. She saw Rosa in the 3rd row crying with pride, saw other parents congratulating her afterward, saw Miguel surrounded by his fellow musicians laughing and talking like he belonged. Margaret left before the lights came up. She drove home to her empty mansion, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier. The piano in the hallway sat silent and untouched, just like always. She sat at it that night, alone in the dark, pressed one key, just one. The note rang out pure and clear, echoing through rooms that no one lived in, just existed in. For the first time in her life, Margaret Whitmore understood what she'd lost. Not a maid, not background music for her parties, but the chance to be part of something real, something that mattered. She thought about calling Rosa to apologize. Her hand even reached for her phone. But pride, that old familiar friend, stopped her. Instead, she sat at her expensive piano in her expensive house, surrounded by expensive things, and felt poor for the first time in her privileged life. Meanwhile, across town in a small apartment, Rosa and Miguel celebrated with pizza they could barely afford but ordered anyway. They laughed and talked about the performance, about his next piece, about the future that suddenly seemed bright and possible. They'd lost a job but gained something infinitely more valuable. Their dignity, their dreams, each other, and that, Rosa thought as she watched her son's happy face, was worth more than all of Margaret Whitmore's money combined.